And do you like puppies? And what's your favorite type of ice cream?
Natural Order Podcast, Episode 19. Tucker Carlson, Vladimir Putin reaction.
No, it's gross.
It is gross. Welcome to the Natural Order Podcast with your hosts, Ryan O'Leary and Adam Heyman. Natural Order Podcast, once again, Brian O'Leary and Adam Heyman with you.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
We're doing well. We're recording this on a Saturday, pre-Super Bowl. And the Heyman Nature program earlier this week, Adam, you predicted a winner of the Super Bowl, even though you're not I wouldn't say you're not a football fan. You just don't watch football anymore. Same with me.
Huge football fan all my life. Yeah, but I gave it up for COVID, much like giving up meat for Lent. I got so mad at him for wearing those masks, these healthy 20-year-olds. I'm just offended. But yeah, no, I have a strong prediction, even though I can't name a single player on the 49ers team. I'm picking them to win.
Okay. I was going to say, well, just suspend the cliffhanger and send you to HeymanNature.com and latest Heyman Nature podcast, which it's a good one. We talk, or not we, I'm not on it, but Adam, you talk a lot about gambling, and anyway, and the Super Bowl came up in conversation. But we are here Saturday before Super Bowl because a couple days ago, Tucker Carlson had an interview with Vladimir Putin, who we talked about on our last episode ever so briefly, but we talked more in the context of the Russian election that we both tended to agree that it wasn't going to be much of a contest and Vlad would continue to steamroll. We both watched Tucker's interview. I have some thoughts, maybe a lot of thoughts. You have probably the same. Why don't I turn the floor over to you, Adam, and you can have your initial reaction, and we can go back and forth here. How about?
Well, yeah, I have a few thoughts about the interview, which was groundbreaking and historic. But first, even more groundbreaking and even more historic was the reaction to Tucker's going over there and conducting this interview in the first place here at home.
Prior to the interview prior to it even airing, right? Yeah.
The outraged screeching that how dare this journalist do journalism? What is he thinking? I'm appalled by what the talking boobs on TV are so upset about.
Yeah. Well, you see that in the past, Putin has had an audience with Barbara Walters, George Stephanopoulos, a bunch of other Western journalists. I can't remember what else. And then now it's outraged that Tucker Carlson goes over there. Obviously in the middle of a war or foreign crisis or however they're describing it over there. And I didn't no Western journalist outside of Tucker. I don't know if having the guts is the right thing to go over there. They're just ideologically opposed to even being within Putin's sphere whatsoever right now, that they don't want to be seen as on the side of whatever they call Russia these days. But it's a far cry from a few years back. And Adam, I don't know if you've seen this, but I thought it was we talked about AI generated content last episode. And I swear this thing, and we'll put it in the show notes. I didn't have it prepared, but it came to mind that I thought this was AI generated content. Never saw it before, but Vladimir Putin playing the piano, solo piano, and singing Blueberry Hill in English amongst a throng of American celebrities. Sharon Stone, Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn were there. Kevin Costner was in the room. This is probably 10 or 12 years ago or whatever. But Vladimir Putin is crooning Blueberry Hill. I think it's Fats Domino. I'm not entirely sure.
Chuck Berry?
Well, yeah, it's from that era of rock and roll and whatever. But either way, I don't know what this was, but I've seen it several times. And I watched it again the other day because I was on a having a conversation with a friend of mine. He said, like you said, groundbreaking interview, but just weird too. And I'm like, was it weirder than Blueberry Hill? And I still not got a response. So, friends of Natural Order Podcast, we urge you to check out the show notes here, and I'll link to the Blueberry Hill video, because that, I think you could objectively say, was weirder than this interview, which was weird in many ways.
It was definitely weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still would like somebody to explain to me how one journalist going somewhere and interviewing the leader of some country, whether they're at war or not, how that's not interesting, how that's not newsworthy. And just conducting an interview isn't taking a side.
No.
This is insanity. And ostensibly, we're not involved in this conflict.
Yeah,
wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Ostensibly, proxy war, why that would be wrong.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, gets an audience in front of Congress. He's on all the talk shows. He gets an audience in front of the Canadian Parliament. He gets an audience with whoever wants to talk to him like he's some sort of rock star. The guy's an idiot, a doofus, an actor. That's not what Vladimir Putin is. Say what you will about his ideology, his methodology, or what. He's not a dumb guy. He's very, as we saw in the interview, very knowledgeable about history, or at least his version of Russian history, which he sets it up in about a half hour of why essentially the Russian Federation went into Ukraine.
It makes me wonder, I don't speak Russian.
Yeah.
And just pushing aside for the moment the whole fear that it's just a deep fake, the voice actor, the translator isn't saying what. And anyway, I thought it was amazing that Putin just calmly says, if you'll just give me 30 seconds, perhaps a minute, I'll lay down some of the history of the nature of these territories. And then, a half hour later, he's still talking about the history. And I thought, I told my wife, I said, I think he's trying to hypnotize Tucker Carlson.
Right. Could be. Well, he said early on, 30 seconds or a minute, and then he starts in the 8th century.
Right.
And like, okay, we're
naming the princes and the regents and who begat who.
Yeah.
I mean, what was he
biblical
doing?
In scope.
I mean,
I get it.
If I was going to steel man it, I guess I'd say he's trying to demonstrate his knowledge, maybe in contradistinction to our own president.
Oh, I think that was a big part of it, because the history of the Russian people is much richer than the history of the American nation, so-called, or whatever.
Yeah,
or even the culture. It's because we're relatively young. I mean, he goes back to the 8th century.
Right.
We go back to, at best, the 15th century.
Right.
The late 15th century.
That's a stretch.
That's a real stretch. Early 16th century. But with less than 20,000 people. We're talking a civilization over there.
I was astonished by, the length and breadth. I thought he talked way too long. But again, in his defense, it makes sense if you're talking about this modern conflict, to take into account the cultural and historical relationship between this area, Russia and the Rus people, and Ukraine. I mean, you don't need to talk about the names of the Prince Regent or whatever, but It does make sense, to take it in context, in the same way that if you were a member of the English government and you were trying to make an argument for why Scotland or Ireland should be a part of your political unit, obviously you talk about the history and make some sort of cultural argument, historical argument.
Right.
So whether you agree with his argument or not, it does make sense for him to lay that down. Maybe you don't need 30 minutes.
Right. Yeah, I would maybe I'd push back on him a little more if I were Tucker. I don't know if I would have got there in the first place, but if I had the question, it was essentially claiming that for the most part, the Ukrainian people and the Russian people are relatively of the same heritage. And Tucker, to some extent, said, well, like the wars in the 20th century, particularly the early, first half, they reset a lot of the boundaries of all these nations and countries and people. And Putin also said something about the Ukraine being the terminology for Ukraine essentially was outside or borderlands.
Hinterland or something.
Yeah, borderlands of, and it was in his case Russia. But when I was thinking about that, I was like, Ukraine essentially has been swapping back and forth between these empires, and parts of it have been within Russia, parts of it been Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Polish, I won't call it an empire, a kingdom or whatever at different points, probably Romania. But anyway, the point is that people, let's take, for instance, Ludwig von Mises. He was an Austrian. He called himself an Austrian. He was from Austria. He was in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, born, raised, lived. But you look at the place in the map where he was born and raised and lived for the most part, it is in present-day Ukraine, which there's a lot of people like that. And that present-day Ukraine only became, after the, World War II, the Ukrainian Socialist Republic, or whatever the heck, the Soviet, whatever you want to call it. So that border got redrawn again. And then now that, in the 90s we talked about, where the Soviet Union splintered apart, that became its own sovereign nation, kind of, anyway.
Well, you said what you would have done in Tucker's shoes. And if I was there after Putin went on his 30-minute long history lesson, I would have said, well, that's interesting, but I'm a libertarian. I believe in secession. If you're trying to make an argument that Ukraine is rightfully part of Russia, I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
If they want, form a plebiscite or whatever and want to cut off, I'm totally fine with that. And actually, that argument sort of helps Putin's side if he would only embrace such a thing.
Well,
because isn't a huge part of this problem that the eastern section, the eastern third, is Russian speaking, Russian leaning. They thought that their president in Kiev got ousted improperly. Aren't you actually fighting a war of secession for the Donbass region in a way?
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if he sees that, but that's exactly, he's not a libertarian by any means.
But not at all.
But
he murders a little bit too much for such.
That principle is exactly in place for the eastern half. But I don't know what his entire motivations are. He was a little squirrely on what his entire motivations are, other than for this nationalist position. But really, he started talking more about this nationalist globalist type idea, which I thought was not good for his argument. If you want to be sympathetic to his position, being a on the side of the globalists, it's weird. It's a weird contradiction, or something.
Well,
where he's globalist and nationalist at the same time.
I read that as him being a squirrely politician trying to have it both ways.
Yeah.
He wants to do what he wants to do for his nationalist reasons, but he's making overtures to what I would imagine, perceives as a globalist impulse in the West, and obviously that's the case with the WEF and all the, globalist institutions.
Yeah, he sounded
UN Monetary Fund.
He sounded hurt by not being able to be accepted, or when Russia was not accepted into NATO, and so that's a globalist thing. Like, why does Russia want to be in NATO to defend themselves against Iran? I mean, that's
if you think he's a monster. If you think he's a monster, he's just being slippery and weaselly and trying to, get his way, get NATO to back off or invite him in so it's not a thing. And if you take him at his word, maybe he actually wanted, Russia to be part of this. It doesn't seem like he wants war necessarily. It's just, hey guys, you brought your military alliance right up to my borders,
right.
And now
Pat Buchanan was talking about that since the early 90s, since the Soviet Union split up. He's like, guy, we need to bring our troops home. Ron Paul, same thing. We need to bring our troops home, and we can't put missiles at the doorstep of the Soviets and now the Russians.
Right.
We can't do that. That's poking the bear, literally poking the Russian bear.
Especially not in Ukraine, which,
Right.
if you were, as Putin is, if you study Russian history, that's where the armies come rolling through to take over Russia.
And
you can't have
historically.
that. You need a buffer or something, or at least to have them as a state who's oriented towards you and not oriented towards the bulk of the military alliance, whose only existence is to defend themselves against you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned secession, and we've talked about it in one of our shows before, kind of the national divorce question. And so in Ukraine, right now they are their own country, like it or not. In this eastern part, the Donbass region, seemingly the people, like you mentioned, Russian speaking, Russian culture, all that stuff, want to go to Russia. And this has happened in that area in a few counties or provinces of other nations. And it's tenuous, and it's not really there. Nobody's letting anybody go. So there's warfare, to keep them within, say, the Union. Ironically, with our nation's history, it's very ironic that we're doing this. However, I believe, you believe, people have the right to secede from whatever government. This is our founding of the American Republic. Thomas Jefferson's words, Declaration of Independence, a birth certificate of this nation, and we seem not to be heeding that language, I guess, overseas.
The urge to dominate overwhelms. I mean, we've talked about it before. I support the efforts of these counties in the eastern part of Oregon to secede and join, quote, Greater Idaho.
Right.
I want people to get the political union that they want, not one that's forced upon them. I don't know about you, Brent, but the most interesting part of that interview for me was when Tucker just says, "Hey, who blew up Nord Stream?"
Yeah.
And Putin just goes, "You."
Tucker
goes, I was busy that day.
Yeah, too busy.
But I mean, I wish they would have talked about that a whole bunch more.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
I think it was it Seymour Hersh, the intrepid Seymour Hersh, that really shined a light on that whole.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any big follow-up on one side or the other.
Right.
He made a lot of pretty amazing accusations that it was directly us, our military units. I mean, and then the other side has been pretty much quiet, with the exception of that weird story that it was just some Ukraine aristocrat who used a boat or a hired yacht or something, as if logistically those tools, that organization, that person could have accomplished the job of what would require, obviously, very highly trained and equipped underwater demolitions experts. The kind of stuff we do, not the kind of stuff some rich guy with a yacht could get away with buying his equipment at Radio Shack or whatever.
Yeah, you have to have a frogman get down underneath there and do something, or a team of frogmen, as opposed to.
I think you'd need a decompression chamber. I mean, I think you need a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so that one. A safer version of one of those things we talked about in the year in review. They would go and try and find the Titanic. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, man. This whole idea, like you mentioned, Greater Idaho, I'd prefer Eastern Oregon just to be Eastern Oregon and not have to join up with Idaho. That's just my personal preference as a native Oregonian. I
think they did it that way because it's harder to try and negotiate a 51st state or whatever.
Agreed.
I think there's more legal hurdles.
Yeah, agreed. I think, yeah. I know their motivation, and their motivation to get rid of, the west of the mountains. There's just like a lot more people and a lot more crazy people west of the mountains, but there's a lot of decent folk. on both sides, but whatever. Like we talked about in the past, like if you just take the big cities out of any one of these things, there's normal people all over this country that might not be entirely our way of thinking, but it's not leaning heavily toward crazy. But that beside the point, you have in Russia, this is the same kind of deal, right? Where people have to vote in order to know that, oh yeah, we want to join, or there's some sort of plebiscite of, caucus or whatever. There has to be some group of people saying, yeah, we want, and there's obviously going to be some dissension where it's not going to be 100%, I guess, in other words. So the people, just like in the United States, or the 13 colonies, there was a third rebel, third loyalist, and a third just kind of swaying with whatever side won. That's the consensus historical opinion. I think it's a little stronger for the Donbass to go toward Russia, but it's not 100%. So what do we do about the minority? And that's the thing the problem with democracy in general is that the minority gets overrun by the majority. Mm-hmm. And the idea of a republic, which we were supposed to be guaranteed in this country with the Constitution, kind of safeguards that a little bit. But it's not the case. All the global elites talk about democracy, when it doesn't really work for the minority. The minority gets creamed.
As you're saying these words, guarantee.
Yeah.
What?
Parchment promise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing, the Princess Bride. I don't think these words mean what you think they mean. They don't guarantee anything. They don't protect anything. It's just look around.
Well, let's play their game. They say this. They write this down, sure. And let's think they want to do what they said. And
the libertarian argument, first of all, is to argue that if you do have a political unit, you should respect the right, some version you should respect of natural rights, and that will minimize the oppression. But if such a thing is impossible, we also say, okay, if Donbass wants to secede from Ukraine, they can do that. And any people inside Donbass who don't like that arrangement, well, they can secede too. We want a situation where nobody is forced to be a part of a polity they don't want to be. And anything else than that is some form of an oppression. And whether you agree that that's the way it should be or not, you should at least be honest enough to say that's what you're talking about. You're talking about oppressing people and forcing them into your system against their will.
Yeah.
And all their property,
right.
Obviously.
And I guess the big thing, it'd be fine to fly a Russian flag over historical Russia, whatever, the historical Russian Empire. I think that's fine. But on the other hand, why have this top-down government from Moscow in all these hinterlands or borderlands or whatever it might be? Like, I mean, Russia's predominantly in Asia, and it's a European country. I mean, for crying out loud. So, they govern in a lot of Asia, and it's like, well, these people are certainly different than the people in, the Baltic region. Like they're wildly different people and cultures, even though they're united under one flag. So why can't we have more political decentralization, even if you want to fly? And that was, again, going back to the whole concept of the United States. That's what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be you fly under the American flag, but really your country is Virginia or Massachusetts or Georgia or whatever it was. But the United States, the Confederation, the whatever, that's a bad word now, I guess. But the Federated States, the Federal Republic, were the government in D.C., what eventually ended up to be D.C., they were to provide the common defense for everybody else, and a few other rules to live by. But predominantly, you're your own culture. If you're a Georgian, you're way different than the guy from Maine. You're way different, entirely different people. Because if you read Albion Seed by David Hackett Fisher, it talks about the 4 different folkways that came over from England to form this nation. All these people settled in different places, thus those separate cultures that existed for ages in England and the borderlands of England and Scotland, they came to the United States and settled in entirely different places. Anyway, that's why you have distinct, or did anyway, have more distinct cultures, and why these people from these different states didn't quite get along. A few years later, you get this war between the states. Seems like that was the entire story of late 18th and late 19th and early 20th century Europe. This idea that, oh yeah, we should unify Italy, Germany, Russia to some degree. Then they split up by the end. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think the idea of political decentralization, whether you're under one flag, one global flag, or whatever, like we're gonna get in the Star Trek years, still good idea.
And I think the more you centralize, the more you are increasing the pressure on a pressure cooker that's just bound to explode as people want to revolt.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the interview.
Yeah.
I wish I spoke Russian.
Right.
Because, I'm a poker player and I'm trying to read this guy. I'm trying to figure out what he's all about, and doing it through a translator is a little harder. I thought he laid out, what I believe to be the correct history, roughly, of this region and the U.S.'s involvement in ways that I do not like one bit. I thought he did a decent job of that. What do you think about the claim? I've heard other analysts and pundits say that he seemed out of it, or stupid, or incompetent. I didn't get that sense.
I didn't get that feeling either.
I think he was slippery like a politician,
right,
like a weaselly diplomat. But I thought he looked plenty lucid to me.
That's a good analysis, because I didn't even think about that. I was like, all right, Tucker and Putin, like these two personalities are coming together and they're gonna butt heads and clash. But no, he's still a politician. Is a politician, and I think you're right. I don't think he was out of it, but like you said, I wish I could have spoke Russian. But I think what happened is that they probably had a translator there translating for both guys real time.
Yeah, they had the thing in the ear.
But then I think the guy we heard was probably an overdub of that.
I'm certain of it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I know some Russian words, and you could see that he was leading the charge. So obviously that was a post-production thing.
Right. So I think, to your point about Putin being a politician and to combat this idea that him being out of it, he would pause when Tucker asked him a pretty tough or pointed question. He'd pause and get the full translation, because Putin understands English, clearly. He's saying Blueberry Hill, for crying out loud. He knows English.
Well, you don't have to know English to learn those phonetic words.
No, you don't. But I'm sure he has a grasp of. He's close to 70, or if not over 70 years old, and he's been around and been the president of a major nation for several decades, and he knows enough Russian or English to be dangerous. Let's put it that way. But he wanted to, clarify whatever, and he really made sure that he had time to organize his thoughts in his own brain before he responded.
He was very cautious, yeah.
And it was a good move. Whether as a foreign language interview, it's a good move to do. And I think that that didn't come across to most people, that's exactly what he was doing.
Oh, no, he looked, calculating and cold like a snake. Something else just occurred to me as I was watching the interview. He would just blithely talk about all these conversations and relationships that he's had with our presidents.
Right.
Going back to I think Bush Sr.
Yeah.
But at least Clinton. And before he was president, he was involved highly in the government.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just interesting because, he's making the point, at least obliquely, that, how can you trust a guy who's only here as a leader for 4 years, maybe 8 years? And I was, I don't believe that there should be a nation state or a kingdom. I don't believe these organizations should be structured that way, that our lives should be run from the top like that. But it did make me wonder, how does anybody take the United States seriously and make long-term agreements when the president only has a 4-year term? Then I'm like, oh, well, we've got that handled because they're not really in charge. It's the deep state that makes policy, and that is unchanging no matter who we elect.
Well, he was
and I'm
in,
like,
he was
well, I guess that kind of makes it works in an evil sort of way.
he was definitely intimating that, if not outright saying that too, because
Yeah,
he talked to say
yeah.
Bill Clinton, and then Bill Clinton like, yeah, we can do that, no problem. I'm the chief, you know,
Yeah, then he
as a
goes back and
president.
talks to his handlers and like,
Yeah, right. No.
sorry.
So, yeah, that was a bit disturbing to hear. I mean, as as an American patriot myself, like, you know, I see how foolish a lot of these people are. I mean, they are really bad. But the other thing, as far as Putin and talking to these people, is that he was talking, like, he had Russian history licked. I mean,
Sure,
like we talked
I
about
assume.
it. Yeah, or
Yeah.
his version of it. He had it licked. But then Tucker asked some questions about, oh, what year was this where you talked to Obama or talked to Bill Clinton or talked to George Bush Sr., Jr., or whatever. And he's like, why do I have to know exact dates or something like that? I'm like, because you had exact dates of when, like, Prince whatever was born in the 1300s is why you have to know what happened a few years ago. Yeah.
You know, if he hadn't come with all that names and dates and places, I would have said, well, yeah, you're right. I don't remember exactly when I had conversations, blah, 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 either. But then he did come with all that detail, so it made me wonder.
Well, he handed Tucker his file of whatever it was.
That was weird. What do you think
like,
was in there?
I don't know if it's like all the dates where he talked to Bill Clinton and talked to all these people about it, or
was he? I think it was before that, right? Wasn't he giving him
definitely.
copies of documents
it was right
that
at the beginning.
Yeah, no, and that were like these ancient documents.
Yeah, and if you watch the end or the post, Tucker had a post interview, a little monologue. He's sitting in some conference room.
Oh no, I missed that.
Yeah, and he's talking about, like, it was just right after the interview. So the interview was taped several days before he actually aired it. But anyway, this is a post-interview react right after. It was only a couple minutes long. And then he's like, yeah, and, you know, Putin handed me this folder. He holds it up. It's still it's still unbuttoned. He hasn't looked at it, so who knows what's in this folder. It's real interesting, but I'm guessing it has some background of what, you know, the talking points that he wanted to get across. I don't know.
I don't think Tucker should open that.
Be like the Pulp
Imagine
Fiction
if it was
thing.
like some honeypot sort of thing.
Right.
You know, it's just a trap.
Yeah.
You take these documents and carry them back home, and all of a sudden you're a spy or something.
Yeah. Oh, it's like
Or
the CIA, an agency you intended to join. We're glad you didn't. He knew Tucker's history better than Tucker knew much about anything. It seemed like. So Putin did his research on Carlson, and it wasn't hard to find because Tucker is, you know, more or less an open book about his life. But
sure,
yeah,
I did think it was good of Tucker to press the issue to try and get that one dude freed.
I didn't know the story behind that, but it sounds Putin was real squirrely on that.
Super squirrely.
That was one of his worst parts of the interview, I thought, because.
Then he, you know, as he's criticizing Clinton and others for making promises and then saying, oh, I need to go back to my people. He was all of a sudden talking about the needs of the security interests that had arrested the guy or something. You're like, oh, that's not really up to me, or we could talk about it. I mean, just super squirrely.
Yeah.
And I wish I knew more about that case. I didn't know what to make of it.
Well, because on the other side of the conflict, there was a guy I was following on Twitter for a while. His name was Gonzalo Lira. And then all of a sudden I remember he had a tweet one day. He's like, he was living in Ukraine at the time, and he's a American guy. His father's from South America somewhere, Argentina or Chile, I don't know. But he's like, if you don't hear from me, I've been abducted by the Ukrainian police or armed forces or whatever. So you didn't hear from him at all ever. He somehow got word. I don't know. Maybe he got one little word out. I'm not sure. But his father was on the Tucker Carlson show or whatever it's called now on Twitter X, and talking about, he was a journalist and he was saying things against the Ukrainian regime, and they kidnapped him and put him in jail Well, turns out like a few days, a couple weeks after he was on that show, Gonzalo Lira Jr. or I don't remember his father's name, but the son died in a Ukrainian prison. And there's no outrage from the American public about that at all. I mean, Tucker, well, maybe in the public, but not the government or the major media forces. Tucker got this guy's father on there to talk about how ridiculous he was being treated, but it's like crickets from the mass media. And
dude,
but we have this thing with this other reporter, and it's the biggest deal in the, I don't know. Anyway.
It boggles my brain.
Yeah.
The narrative that's been swallowed by the American electorate. On the one side, Putin bad, Russia bad, corrupt, oligarchy, and that's true. All of that's true.
Sure.
But then since they're in a conflict with Ukraine and our government is supporting the Ukrainian side, well, then we've swallowed this narrative that this is a pure democracy. Zelensky's an angel. Well, nonsense.
It's total nonsense.
Ukraine is the most corrupt country in this entire region, unless the needle's so pegged from all the others that you can't tell the difference in corruption. And he's shutting down newspapers. He's shutting down churches. He's conscripting people. He's disappearing people that disagree with the regime. He's canceling elections. But over here, it's the evil, big, bad Russian bear versus, the pride of European democracy in Kiev and Zelensky.
It's a bunch of crap.
It's stupid. It's so stupid. It makes me so crazy.
Well, Putin in this interview,
go ahead.
We're
fed pablum, and we choke on it. Just pablum, this nonsense narratives.
Well, Putin went through the whole thing, and I started reading about this, years ago also, and it's like started questioning the whole narrative. And since I've developed my own idea of actually what happened, but Putin mentioned in this thing about the different coups d'etats. He didn't go into it in super detail, but the reality is he just said, there are coups d'etats in Ukraine. And John McCain was one of the was a major backer of this whole regime change in Ukraine. Sorry guys, let's revote. That didn't work out quite well. Let's just do a revote. It's like, dude, you're not on the freaking playground here. We can't do that. We're not going to do a replay because we don't agree on, the pass interference and touch football on the playground. No, this is real stakes.
We're all about democracy. So we try and do a coup in 2004 in that country and go again in 2014. And, meanwhile, we preach that we're just all about democracy. It's like, no, we're not. We want these countries to be ruled by our puppets. And if that's great, then we say, will of the people. And if that's not what happens, we say, redo. We need to redo.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing that there's a lot of things I believe that slipped under the radar. Even me, I've only watched the interview one time, but there's a lot of things I'm guessing I missed. I saw probably 95% of it because of internet connections and I was on the run and whatever, but tried to watch most of it. And I did get to see a lot of, but a lot of the things people are going to come in, I kind of blank slated this thing. I just came in with like, I'm whether my position, whatever it is, I just want to see what this guy says. And because I don't want to have come in with any prejudgments of Putin himself, Tucker Carlson, whatever they were going to talk about. This is the first like legit interview that we're getting from anybody on this side. You got Zelensky and Biden and the whole that apparatus, which it's not a legitimate interview. It's all press conferences, and if they are interviews at all, they're kind of transformed into this press. But it was interesting that this is the first real interview with any major player in this conflict. I just wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth or the bear's mouth, and I did. And I tended to, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting, and Putin is a legitimate head of state, which does not exist currently in the United States of America. Just flat out doesn't. And not saying he's better.
you are aware that Joe Biden exists.
He
I
does well.
mean,
He's not as a legitimate leader, like really. Yeah. I
you brought
mean,
up an interesting point when you said it's the first real interview done on either side.
right.
And that's obviously true for Putin, but then it made me think, well, yeah, every interview I've seen so far of Zelensky was by a fawning,
Yeah.
Ukraine supporting lapdog. Were there any quote unquote journalists that were against the U.S. funding the Ukraine war, who gave Zelensky a tough interview? Did that even happen
No.
once?
Well, see, the other side is all, yeah, like you said, it's all people for the Ukraine side. Like, what about a guy like me, a guy like Tucker Carlson, guy like you? We're not on any
Sure.
side. Why can't we have a voice? I'm not certainly
these
not
questions-
for Russia to invade and kill people, whoever they are. I don't agree with that. I also don't agree with sending $100 billion from the federal treasury in the United
gross.
States. It is gross.
And every interview that I saw, I had to turn off immediately because the questions were of the sort, why are you so brave and great? And do you like puppies? And what's your favorite type of ice cream, Mr. Zelensky?
Yeah, and the fatigues.
God, you're awesome.
Your
so
faux
awesome.
military fatigues look awesome.
Yeah, God, you look tough.
You black T-shirt.
Are you technically a dwarf, or are you? What's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't get it. Just like, I mean, I said in the last episode that I didn't get the whole, or one of the last episodes, I didn't get the whole Taylor Swift phenomenon. I really don't get the American fascination with Ukraine and the flag people, with the flag in the profile people. I do not get that whatsoever. It's like, I was going to say after the interview, I was going to tweet something. I was like, oh, is it time to put Russian flags in our profiles now? Because he's actually making some sense. But I'm like, I'd just be just as dumb as these other people with the Ukraine flags.
Speaking of flags,
Yeah.
man, as you know, I don't agree with the entire concept of a nation state. I really disagree with my own United States government. But when they invited Vladimir Zelensky into U.S. Congress and he unfurled that Ukrainian flag,
yeah,
I almost snapped. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I'm not this, flag worshiping rah 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 guy, but what in the world is happening in our House of Representatives? You got some lunatic who is siphoning money out of our pockets, unfurling a Ukrainian flag. What?
Yeah, and I think, I don't have it in front of me right now, but we'll put it in the show notes. But Rand Paul was on a Fox Business interview with Larry Kudlow yesterday, I believe. And Kudlow, I don't know what his position is on the whole thing, but I saw the clip of Rand Paul, basically saying, taking Joe Biden to task with sending another, I don't know, however many hundreds of billions of, or tens of millions, billions of dollars over there to Ukraine, probably in the wake of this interview. And interesting that partway through the interview, you said, oh, Joe Biden's having a press conference. Toward the end of this interview with Tucker, which a lot of people I know had their eyes on. I don't know what the actual ratings are going to be, because I was watching some other people live stream and have commentary. They'd pause it and go, that's what I was watching. So that doesn't count as far as the official numbers or whatever. But anyway, Biden had a press conference at the end of it to talk about this other thing that came out, where this court case, ironically, I think was, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it had something to do with saying, no, we can't go forward with this trial because the guy's not mentally competent to stand trial. This guy is the president of the United States of America. A lower court says he's not a mentally competent human being, but here we are.
I think right wing, I'm not an expert on this issue, but the impression I got is that right wing people are a little bit overplaying, this.
Okay.
But it wasn't like him being adjudicated in compos mentis, so he can't stand trial. I think it was more like whatever the prosecution was saying he would make a sympathetic figure before a jury because he's just a forgetful old man and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I think, everybody uses hyperbole to try and make their case. And I think the right wing is just having a field day with this. I don't think it's that bad, which isn't to say I don't think this man is, suffering from
but the point is that
severe Alzheimer's, because he is.
Yeah. The point is that they're not going to try him anyway because of the sympathy vote he would most definitely get. Or
that's the reason that they
Yeah.
reached for. I mean, maybe it's just political corruption. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, any other thoughts here?
No,
as far as,
just to
before we
say
wrap
that
up?
it was a fascinating interview. I was glad to watch it. I'm glad Tucker did it. I wish we had more, viewpoints to try and triangulate upon what reality is, rather than just the nonsense they feed us in the U.S. media.
Right. Yeah, and I'd be. I guess the one. Well, no, I have several problems with it, but the one thing in particular, what as we close up, is that I wish Tucker would have a bit more analysis on what happened. He did mention in another post interview, little monologue he had in his hotel room, that he said he thought it might take him a year to kind of process what just happened. I think that's too long, especially in today's age. I think he needs to come to grips and do some analysis of exactly what happened, as opposed to just trying to be the guy who gets these big interviews now, which is kind of his play. But if we're going to take Tucker and his new role in the media and his leadership in this new media seriously, I think he needs to be one who not only interviews these people, but has cogent analysis, whether you agree with it or not, after the fact. I think
if he wants to say that he's just an independent journalist, then fine. Well, why doesn't he mediate, an argument between Bill Kristol and John Mearsheimer, for example, or some online war hawk versus, Scott Horton or something. Maybe Tucker doesn't want to be a guy who does the analysis and has a side, but you could certainly make yourself the mediator, like we all wish Joe Rogan would do more often.
Right.
Get yourself a big spotlight on you, and then have all sides that have a perspective lay out their case in real time and get immediate pushback.
Yeah, so I guess
that'd be great.
Yeah, no, it would be great. And I think maybe going forward, I didn't really talk about this with you ahead of time. We've kind of talked about it around the edges, but really, as far as this show goes, I think that is a way. This show is an outlet for both of us to analyze the culture at large and things like that, where we both, on our own shows, yours, Heyman Nature at heymannature.com, and mine, Brian D. O'Leary Show, briandO'Leary.com. We both have interviews with people, but we can come together on this show to and then we both have commentary on our individual shows and analysis independent. But on this show in particular, we can analyze kind of these things at large and maybe even bring in some of the things we talked about, because we get to do this show. I mean, our idea is like once a week. We'd love to possible at this time, but if you subscribe at naturalorderpodcast.com to all our stuff, we can kind of get a better idea on who will support these ideas just like us, and we can spread the word and do some real cogent analysis. I think that we've gotten some great feedback from a lot of folks, and a lot of folks were that have given us feedback. They might not want their names mentioned, but they're real people in this society. So
yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So anyway, just like I said, follow those websites. We'll have and shows, and we'll have links for all that in the show notes. Any more on that?
Well said. Let me
do
a quick plug. Heyman Nature is a video show, so catch it on YouTube. Just search for Heyman Nature and use quotes, because if you don't, you're just going to get 500 links to a Michael Jackson video, which is a great song. I get it. But no, Heyman Nature is a different show.
Yeah. Well, I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill.
Yes, we did. I'm immediately going to go look for that recording.
See you next time, folks. Thanks. For more, head on over to naturalorderpodcast.com. The show notes for today's episode can be found at naturalorderpodcast.com/ep19. That's naturalorderpodcast.com/ep19. And also remember to check out Heyman Nature at HeymanNature.com, The Brian D. O'Leary Show at BrianDO'Leary.com, and of course, Natural Order Podcast